David Pakman, also known as the Pakman, is a former radio host and is one of the original breadtubers who has managed to gain well over 1 million subscribers. By the way, if you're unaware of the term breadtuber, it's just a reference to the political far left section of YouTube. Where was I? So David Pakman really loves to push the white privilege narrative.
White privilege exists. Is white privilege real in the United States? Of course it is. Should we talk about white privilege? Absolutely. If the only difference is race, then there is some degree of white privilege that the poor white person has over the poor black person. I want to talk now a little bit about what have been the pushbacks to the concept of white privilege that we've seen over recent years. One common theme I'm seeing in the reaction I get from the conservative side of my audience is that,
for the record, I am not a conservative. I have never identified as conservative for many reasons. But that doesn't mean that I don't agree with them on various topics. In other words, it's a nice way of saying that I'm not an NPC.
reaction I get from the conservative side of my audience is that the concept of white privilege is one that is used to be racist against white people. And as absurd as it is at its face,
outrageous headlines recently, so let's just play a little clip that you did here.
Texas A&M professor asks, when is it okay to kill whites? New York professor says having a white nuclear family promotes white supremacy. Professor tweets that white people should commit mass suicide. College professor says kill cops, kill all white people, and kill the straights. Professor says all I want for Christmas is white genocide. Georgetown professor says all white people are racist. Trinity College professor calls white people inhuman. Let them fucking die. College professor says believing in hard work is a white ideology. College professor says white people are conditioned to commit mass murder. A professor equates math with white privilege. A professor says white supremacist patriarchy is responsible for the Vegas shooting. Professors hold a white racism course at FGCU. USC professor calls for Holocaust against all white people. Professor says I'll teach my children to be cautious and distrust friendship with white people. Baltimore professor says white people need to personally give all of their money to black people. College professor says some white people may have to die to solve racism. College professor says white masculinity is a problem for America. Georgetown professor says all white people are racist. Rutgers professor was taken to the NYC hospital for psychiatric evaluation after he tweeted threatening to kill white people. White professor calls all white people to mass suicide because of slavery. Here's a slide from a college classroom that says white tears on a mug. Here's another slide from a college classroom that says white people stay colonizing. White privilege does exist. Bigfoot, unicorns, reverse racism, what do they all have in common? Stating that reverse racism isn't real. Y'all white people are dangerous. The horror story says white people are a plague to the planet. Here's one that says white people are crazy. And finally, how white people plagued society.
And people wonder how Trump won an election.
Is not to give up, because this is so important, and it's easy to say throw in the towel and that we're going to leave.
Enough is enough. Go home and stay home.
Now I know just how much of a modern feminist Pac-Man is. So we better listen to the female's perspective.
Now, these are just a few. I have a couple other ones here. You know, the All I Want for Christmas is White genocide professor. You mentioned that one earlier. He was rehired by NYU. You knew that was going to happen. But there was a Texas University paper that printed white people are an abomination. I did a video about that. University of New Mexico professor said racism is a white people problem, and the only good white identity is one that constantly criticizes white people. Hunter College offered students an abolition of whiteness course. Evergreen State College had a day of absence observance. Remember that, when they asked the white people to stay off the campus? And I think there was one teacher who didn't, and then he was viciously attacked and had to actually quit. There was a Hawaii professor demanding the college to stop hiring white cis men. MIT formed a white accountability group. St. John's College in Santa Fe had a study group to talk about the depravity of white people. I mean, we could just go on and on. Florida campus, you mentioned, had offered a course on white racism, and that was in response to the "it's okay to be white" flyers. We're literally saying it's okay to be white, and what's okay to be white, and what's the response? No, it's not. It's literally not okay to be white. Plus, we can talk about the campus workshops on white privilege, white racism, the safe spaces, their special privileges, just for non-whites. We even have Black Lives Matter on campuses saying that they should get free housing and tuition for black students because of racism and slavery. I mean, it's just in your face, like how bad it is.
To be racist against white people. And as absurd as it is at its face, I'm looking for effective ways to communicate with people who think that, right? Because there's no advantage to just arguing and yelling and screaming. How might we communicate with someone who maybe sincerely believes that the concept of white privilege is a construct to discriminate against people for being white, either as some kind of revenge or for whatever other reason? How do you rationalize a conversation with someone like that?
I can tell you how David Pakman rationalizes it.
It is impossible to deny that there is such a thing as white privilege.
So now that we've established how much the Pac-Man loves the white privilege narrative, let's watch and see how he handles the topic of Jewish privilege when it arrives. Before we get into it, I just want to say that I personally think that all this talk about privilege is complete bullshit. I think it's 100% divisive, and that even a 5-year-old can comprehend people have different life experiences. But yet, here we are.
There is a poster that's been going around all over the campus of the University of Illinois at Chicago. The poster says, in very large font, "Ending white privilege starts with ending Jewish privilege." And I'll read to you some of the other things on this poster. Quote, "Jewish Americans make up 2% of the population. 44% of these Jewish Americans are in the top 1%. And then it starts breaking those statistics down into an out of 1,000 people sort of analogy. It's interesting how right-wing anti-Semitism strongly insists that Jews aren't white.
I don't know about you, but I've never met, nor heard, nor seen a Jewish person that didn't identify as Jewish first and foremost.
A white woman.
Well, I don't identify as a white woman.
What do you identify as?
I identify as a Jew.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some exceptions, but they always seem to find a way to let you know.
The Jewish people have a company, and it's for people who want to borrow money and no interest. They want to give them a fishing pole. We want to help people. If they don't have the money, we'll loan it to you. You don't have interest, one day you'll pay us back. So I'm just telling you.
I digress.
But then you have left-wing anti-Semitism, which I would consider this poster falling under left-wing anti-Semitism, which always insists that Jews are white. But first of all, before we even dig into that, they don't even correctly use the Pew source that they cite to appear to be citing data. At the bottom of this poster, it sources some Pew data. But what the Pew data actually says is that 44% of American Jews make $100,000 or more, which does not put 44% of American Jews in the top 1%. Earning $100,000 puts you in the 12%. The 12% doesn't have the exact same ring to it that the 1% has. Anyway, not really the point.
Bullshit.
Did you see what he did there? He just finished stating that it said $100,000 or more, and he based his entire argument on the bare minimum.
earning $100,000 puts you in the 12%.
For more context on the topic that he brought up, a quick wiki search will tell you that the average Jewish income is around $150K, which is really impressive compared to the average of more populated religions, let's say. And if you look at the chart on the right, despite only making up 2% of the population, you can just see how far and beyond they've gotten. And if you think that's impressive, according to Forbes, many times 5 out of the top 10 richest people in America were of Jewish descent.
Oh my God!
Of course, there are some people out there that will attribute all of their success solely because they were allowed to dominate the financial district.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
These people are frauds! What is wrong with you? They are actors, they are frauds!
Relax. It's not like they can buy votes in a great democracy.
There's a reason why the banks decided to keep Trump whole.
We made the decision that he would be worth more alive to us than dead. Dead meaning in bankruptcy. We don't want him to be in bankruptcy. We want him out in the world selling these assets for us. We kept him alive to help us.
Anyway, not really the point. The point is that Jews are often and once again unfairly the targets of conspiracy theories, and that's probably how over $100,000 turned into the top 1%. But even if the data was correct, white people in general have had historical privilege in the US for any number of reasons, right? We could talk about slavery, stories about disease, metals, guns. I mean, there's just so many different ways, right?
I can't believe he went there. But he did go there. I can guarantee you that Jewish companies and families have greatly profited from every single thing you just mentioned. Except maybe for diseases. I don't know about diseases. Now, it is possible that Pakman is just naive on the matter, as this sort of information tends to be suppressed. I'll just let Professor Martin describe his experience.
That I had been teaching this course at Wellesley College for 20 years. I had dealt with the involvement of Christians and Muslims, even African collaborators in the slave trade. You know, wherever the facts took me, I went. I had become aware of the Jewish involvement, and I saw no reason why anybody should object to my dealing with the Jewish involvement. And I asked them rhetorically, you know, who were they who gave them the authority to come into my classroom to tell me what I should teach, what I should not teach. For the next several years, I've discovered in this battle with these folks for the last several years that they'd never liked to flush out the truth in a normal, open fashion. They seem to operate best when they can use their leverage over whatever in the media or whatever to defame you from a distance, but they avoid open debate as much as possible.
Anti-Semitism. But the Jewish people in particular don't have any type of undue privilege that's been handed to them or that they've obtained unfairly. Now, Jews who appear to be white can still be the beneficiaries of what is generally considered to be white privilege in Western society. But recall that Jews make up a microscopic minority in the world and in every country on earth except for Israel. Jews are one of the most, if not the most, persecuted and victimized peoples in human history.
Oh, I never heard that before. I do suppose constantly running around believing you're a victim does open the door to justify other things.
The Talmud says that it is one of the greatest things. Revenge is great.
Almost every one of the Psalms mentions revenge in one way or another. Usually people recite Psalms for the sick. In all of the Psalms, there are maybe 2 verses about the sick. About revenge, there are hundreds of verses.
Jews are one of the most, if not the most, dispersed peoples in the world today, other than, again, the few million Jews that live in Israel.
Oh my goodness, could he have said that with more depression? It's like he was trying to get sympathy points or something.
Jews are one of the most, if not the most, dispersed peoples in the world today, other than, again, the few million Jews that live in Israel.
What a sad little take that is. For comparison, let's hear what former Prime Minister of Israel, Shimon Peres, had to say about it.
ארץ קטנה כמונו, זה מדהים. ואני רואה שאנחנו קונים את מנהטן, וקונים את הונגריה, וקונים את רומניה, וקונים את פולין. אז אין בעיות לנו, אני מבין שהכישרונות והקשרים והתנופה מגיעה כמעט לכל מקום. וזה באמת מעניין. מעניין מפני שאנחנו ארץ קטנה, בסך הכל. וכנראה שקשה לנו מאוד להיות ארץ תעשייתית. פשוט אין לנו מספיק שוק מקומי גדול בשביל לעשות תעשייה מקומית.
Now wasn't that a much more positive take?
And the only real estate that Jews do have is constantly threatened existentially. Threats to the safety, to its safety by its neighbors, threats to its sovereignty because of people throughout the world who don't appreciate its right to exist or the need for it.
Oh. So we're just ignoring the apartheid state that has bombed its neighbors with impunity for decades now.
Okay.
Yes, we're also just ignoring the fact that it's a rogue nuclear state that has started every major conflict it's ever been in.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nobody's ever told you that before? Well, you don't have to take my words for it. Just look it up for yourself. You'll just keep coming across the words preemptive strike. And while you're looking it up, you might want to reflect on why you've never been told this. And if you're looking for even more evidence, you can read Defending the Holy Land by Zayiv Maouz. But you know what? David wants to ignore everything I just stated. So just forget about what I just said.
And Jews have had a constant need to relocate over the last several thousand years due to exiles of all kind.
It wasn't my fault. It's never your fault, Meadow.
So this has all emphasized the need for a mobile form of what we would call capital education. If Jews are successful, it can be attributed to lack of privilege and discrimination for thousands of years.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Liberal arts academia almost universally has an irrational anti-Jewish, or at minimum, and it's two different things to be clear, anti-Israeli agenda. I've seen it personally. Both the right and the left are rampant with anti-Semitism, both explicit and implicit of different kinds.
It truly is absolutely shocking what the left and the right are willing to agree upon.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love.
Do they deserve the same rights? Let's put it that way. Jews, non-Jews, anyone who lives here, let's say, does everyone deserve the same, treated the same? Let's put it that way.
I think not. I think that this is the nation of the Jews, that the Jews should have more rights than the non-Jews.
Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtles.
land for the Jews. All the Jews can come and live here. I think that Jews should have more rights than non-Jews.
Sing with me.
So I think that each Jew should get his own plot of land, and non-Jews shouldn't.
What about the ones who are already here?
There's a halachic issue of having non-Jews in Israel. There's what's called the Ger Toshav, someone who has, if he keeps the 7 laws of Bnei Noach,
The Noahide laws.
then he could live in Israel.
Everybody wants simps.
What would you say? Well, the Jews are God's chosen people.
I am 100%, in fact, Ashkenazi Jewish. Jews are still one of the only oppressed minorities that too many people still fail to see as being victims of marginalization and bigotry because of posters like this that circulate on college campuses. And here's the real question to ask about this poster, because you'll often see stuff like this and people say, we're just making people aware of the facts. Okay, well, what do you suggest be done to end so-called Jewish privilege if you're somebody who's putting this poster out there? Do you want to limit the number of Jews that can go to colleges? Do you want to tax Jewish-owned businesses or some other kind of Jew tax? Where do you plan to go with this? If you've identified this issue that you want to solve, please explain where you want to go in looking for a solution, and then maybe we can figure out what this is really all about.
Well, that's certainly a different tone from...
It is impossible to deny that there is such a thing as white privilege.
So I suppose if this is fair game...
Is white privilege real in the United States? Of course it is. Should we talk about white privilege? Absolutely.
Then I see no reasons why we can't talk about Jewish privilege. Before I begin, I just want to make it perfectly clear that I don't believe just because you're Jewish, you have gained or profited from any of the examples that will be given. I also fully concede that every example is debatable. Now, with all of that said, I'm aware you probably don't give two shits about my 2 cents. So I'm going to go at this as if I was somebody who has been very critical of the Jewish community.
That are just completely fragile, fall apart, ice castles ready to melt. What about that is good? What about that is what we want as a society, both men and women? And Palestinian advocates. And I'm like, bitch, you don't think Google and fucking Facebook are gonna censor them? You don't think they're gonna censor Palestinian advocates? What is wrong with you?
Is there such a thing as Jewish privilege, I guess, from my point of view? Well, I will say that as a Jew, there are certain things that are easier for me, but I still have to do the work, right?
We live in a very privileged life, in a very privileged era. This is by the grace of Hashem. In a very privileged era, in a very privileged countries. And
because Jewish privilege is different from white privilege. Nobody is going to say anything, touch, or bother the Jews. It's already, this thing just, it's proven fact. They get away with murder.